What's going on, y'all? This is Encyclopedia Mac doing another album review today. Today I'm going to be reviewing Tony Bennett at Carnegie Hall. Um, but like I always do, I'm going to do a short bio first on Tony Bennett, then I'm going to get into the album. Tony Bennett, great singer, one of my favorite singers. He was actually born, his name is actually Anthony uh, Benedetto. Definitely Italian name. He was born on August 3rd, 1926, in Astoria, Queens, New York. He was singing and performing at age 10, very young age. Also began doing art, and definitely, if you all haven't seen his artwork, it's incredible. He really has a separate career as an artist. I believe he sells his art privately. I'm not sure whether I want to say you might be able to buy some, online if you look into it. But he's a great artist, a great painter. I mean, he definitely has another career if he ever wanted to stop singing. But just kind of want to go on that too. He enrolled into New York School of Industrial Art. He studied art and music there. And definitely one thing you notice about Tony Bennett's voice, he's definitely a trained vocalist. Perfect pitch, perfect tone. I believe he's a natural baritone because in his earlier records he sounded more like a tenor, but it seems like after that he sings like a baritone range, but he can go up into that tenor range. There's a few singers that can do that, like I mentioned before, like Levi Stubbs of the Four Tops, Sammy Davis Jr., Johnny Gill, um, KC Haley from Jodeci. You have your baritone, but you can push up into that tenor range in full voice without going falsetto. And Tony has one of those voices too, definitely trained. Like when he holds notes, it's almost like an uh, operatic style. Great singer, but I think he's a baritone. But definitely, like I said, he does perfect pitch, perfect tone. Fantastic singer, and kept singing for a while. In 1944, he was drafted into the U.S. Army in World War II. He sang and performed, in the army, in between, fighting time, and everybody acknowledged his talent there as well. He got discharged in 1946 and returned to the U.S. Kept singing in small clubs, just trying to, pay the dues that you got to do. Singer Pearl Bailey asked him to perform for her in New York one day, and then Bob Hope, comedian Bob Hope, saw him perform there and decided to take Tony on the road with him. And he's the one that Bob Hope is the one that asked Tony to shorten his name to Tony Bennett instead of Antonio Benedetto, just for marketing purposes. Not that Antonio Benedetto might not have worked, but I mean, if you want to perform a show, let's welcome, Mr. Anthony Benedetto or Mr. Tony Bennett, the great Tony Bennett, Tony Bennett. It just for marketing reasons. People do that, and just for a marketing purpose, he decided to change his name. So from then on, he went by Tony Bennett. He signed with Columbia Records in 1950, and within the next year, he already had a hit with "Because of You." That was a million seller, went to number one in the pop charts. He had other hits around this time: "Cold Cold Heart," "Blue Velvet." He got married for the first time in 1952, and also around this time, the next year in 1953, recorded one of his most famous songs to this day, "Rags to Riches." Got another gold record. And also, the producers of the musical Kismet asked Tony to sing "Stranger in Paradise" for them for that particular show. And that's actually my favorite song that he did. That was another hit, "Stranger in Paradise." Great song. Love that song. And Tony kept pushing, became one of the country's top performers. He was able to appeal to younger kids as well as older people around that time, because he was only in his 20s here. So, of course, around that time, you're going to appeal to most likely kids or people around your age, teenagers, stuff like that. But also, he was able to perform in, supper clubs. So he had the adult audience too. He was already kind of expanding on his versatility. Kids are gonna, only play things that are popular to them. But you have that adult audience. So they have more money to spend. They'll go out to these supper clubs and pay big money to have a meal and drink and watch people perform. That's why it was so important. Like these supper clubs, you might make as much in a week that you might make in a few months on the road. That's why it was always important for you to try to get into those supper clubs if you could, to kind of get it on all ends. And he was performing on shows like Johnny Carson, and also around this time, like I said, his versatility became more and more well known. He became more and more versatile. He started incorporating more jazz and big band sound to his music. Started performing with Duke Ellington and Count Basie. Then in 1962, he recorded "Today," which might be his signature song. "I Left My Heart in San Francisco." He actually recorded that song in 1962. He actually won a Grammy for that, his first Grammy. And also in that same year, he performed at Carnegie Hall, and tore the roof off the place. Did a great job, and that's going to be the album I review after I do the short bio on him. He kept pushing, kept having hits, steady hits until about 1964. And kind of throwing this in there, Tony was really a really conscious dude too. He was, he worked with, and was involved with civil rights. He met with Martin Luther King. There's pictures of them together and things like that. So he was definitely was helped out in that time frame as well, when America was going through its social turmoil. But around 1965, like I said, he kept pushing. But about 1965, music was starting to change, and jazz and easy listening, as we call it today, just wasn't becoming popular. What was becoming popular was, as they call it, rock and roll. Motown and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Atlantic Records. Just that what they call rock and roll at that time was becoming the dominant sound, and you have to be able to adapt. You either roll with it or get rolled over. You don't have to necessarily um you know you don't have to necessarily completely, you have to adapt, but you don't have to take away your own style. You want to keep your style, but just be able to adjust to where you fit in. But with rock and roll becoming the prominent sound, stars like Tony Bennett, became kind of confused, and musically didn't know where to go. So he was kind of trapped in that era when music changed, unfortunately. But I mean, it does work sometimes. You just have to know how to adjust it. Like I'll give a couple examples, like Stevie Wonder. Stevie came from the '70s era where you play instruments and stuff like that. But once the '80s came, Stevie kept pushing, kept having million sellers with I Just Called to Say I Love You and Part-Time Lover. He kept pushing. It was still Stevie. He still kept his style, but was able to adjust. Same thing with Marvin Gaye. He, from just like Stevie, came from the '60s and '70s, and he went to another label after Motown. But he, like the Midnight Love album with Sexual Healing and all those songs, he was able to still keep it Marvin, but just adjust his sound to where it appealed. And he won a Grammy for that as well. So it can be done, but you just have to take your time and just really kind of analyze things and just figure out how to just fine tune it while keeping your style. What people know you for. And at this time, Columbia Records pressured Tony to do an album with modern songs, by the Beatles, Stevie Wonder. I think it's called Tony Bennett Sings Modern Day Songs or something like that. It wasn't a bad album. I think Tony did a pretty good job. It just wasn't his style. I liked his version of My Sharia more by Stevie Wonder. I thought it was a pretty good song, but the album definitely flopped. And Tony, I remember reading an article where Tony said he physically got sick from recording that album. He just didn't want to do it. And things kind of kept getting worse and worse for him as with Columbia Records. So he left them for MGM in 1972, and just unfortunately just couldn't get any hits going, couldn't get that magic back for the time being. And he also tried to start his own label around this time called Improv. Um, in like the mid '70s, like '75. But it's difficult to, especially at that time. Nowadays, you don't really need a label with the internet, and you can go to electronic stores and get materials, to record your own, you record your own songs and anything like that if you need to. But back in those days, it was hard to start your own label. In the mid '70s, you being yourself. I mean, you definitely needed a machine back then, and Tony didn't have distribution, so the label just crashed and burned. Like I said, just it was just you needed a machine back then to really be progressive. You definitely distribution. That's the key. I mean, you can, if you record an album and you can pay for everything yourself, but if your album can't be distributed to fans across the world, it's going to be hard for you to really keep pushing. And he was going through personal issues also at the time. He got a divorce from his first wife, then he remarried again, and the second marriage started to kind of have issues. He wasn't popular anymore. So he was wasn't getting booked as much for shows, and then he had tax issues. You know, Uncle Sam came knocking on his door like it does a lot of stars, and unfortunately, around this time he began, he was on drugs for a period of time, so just was really a real dark period of time at his time, and he almost OD'd, and then once he got himself together, he realized he needed to get himself together, so he actually um, re-signed with Columbia in 1986, and he had a comeback album that year with album called The Art of Excellence, and like I said, he kind of went back to what he always did, and started doing well, and his son actually became his manager, and what his son was doing was it kind of became the opposite for him this time. You more of the older audience has moved on, or unfortunately maybe passed away or whatever. You want to stay in the game and kind of keep things moving. I mean, it won't hurt to market to the younger audience. So that's what his son did. His son marketed him towards the younger audience. He began doing modern day talk shows like Conan and David Letterman, doing appearances on The Simpsons, um, and continued to win Grammys. So now the younger kids, um, know this guy as well as the older audience. So you really have both. And now younger kids, like, hey, Dad, you listen to Tony Bennett? Yeah. So it's, you have really both audiences as well, but on the opposite end now, younger kids that never heard your music are listening to your music now. And then the kicker would really put him back into prominence, and he still is to this day. It was 1994. He did MTV Unplugged, and that really did a great job. So that really put him on another level. That really solidified him with the younger audience as well. And then a lot of younger people, they listen to Tony Bennett all day. You talk to him. I'm one of them. You know, and since then he's been having number one albums, Grammy after Grammy, hit album after hit album. Since then he's really been pushing along. So definitely a legend. And that's pretty much it as far as his bio goes. I'm going to go ahead and get into the album. Live in Carnegie Hall. Album was recorded on June 9th of 1962. They re-released it in 1997, but when it came out in 62, it was number 37 on the pop chart, which is not bad, but I think um, really 62 albums weren't really that big in general. It was more of a still a singles market, and then maybe live albums too, just weren't really that marketable. I think live albums were like uh, more like a resume thing, like, hey, I can do that too. And there were 18 tracks that weren't on the original disc that are on this one. Of course, vinyl didn't, had limited room, but CDs were digital, so they were able to put the whole performance on this album. This one has 23 tracks, and this two has 21 tracks. And he does all of his hits on this album at the time: "Stranger in Paradise," "Love Look Away," "I Left My Heart in San Francisco," "Rags to Riches." So he did a great. So you get all the big hits, and then he does other Broadway tunes at the time, standards at the time, a couple of songs that Frank Sinatra was singing. And I'm going to list here the 18 tracks that were omitted, that they put back on the CD on this one. "Fascinating Rhythm" is the first one. He did a medley, "Put on a Happy Face," and then "Comes Once in a Lifetime," "My Ship," "Speak Low," "Have I Told You Lately," "That Old Black Magic," "A Sleeping Bee," "I've Got the World on the String," "This Could Be the Start of Something Big," "Without a Song," "Toot Toot Tootsie," "The Rules of the Road," "The Best Is Yet to Come," "Chicago," "Taking a Chance on Love," "Pennies from Heaven," and "Smile." All in all, the album is almost 2 hours long. It's an hour and 46 minutes long. So you definitely get, a great show from Tony. And Tony, some of these people can't sing live. Tony is not one of those people. He's in his absolute prime. Like I said, just perfect. Perfect. He performs with the orchestra. The orchestra does a great job as far as instrumentation. He does a great job vocally. Like I said, just holding those perfect notes and everything. It's a real intimate type of performance. Even though it's Carnegie Hall, the audience pretty much they'll clap before a song starts, or if they recognize it, or perform after a song ends. But you still Pretty much it's here. It's just Tony in the audience, in the orchestra. Really don't really a lot of live shows. There's a lot of clapping and loud yelling and stuff in between the songs. That's very rare. Every now and again, somebody would yell something or you know, yeah, scream something out or something like that. But as far as it's really just more of a Tony in his voice, and he doesn't disappoint. Definitely an essential Tony Bennett album. If you don't have any of his albums, uh, get them definitely. But this is definitely a must-have, most definitely. Might be his best. He released quite a few live albums that are available now, but this is definitely a must-buy. Um, my favorite song is actually the very last song called "The Glory Road." It's definitely a different style for Tony. Like I said, he does the traditional easy listening as we would call it songs in this album. He does the big band jazz songs, but this one was even from the orchestra's perspective, it's a very kind of dark, kind of um, very dark sound, and it's almost 9 minutes long. But Tony just floats on it. And this one is he kind of has the audience kind of clapping a little bit at the beginning of the song, but he sings certain parts, and then parts of it he speaks and acts it out. So that's different. And when he speaks and acts it out, the band will pull back and with a dark like dramatic chords, and then like I said, he'll talk and sing, and then at the very middle of the song, he had his bongo player jam up bongos for several minutes until until he gets back to singing. Definitely his most theatrical performance of the album. But great album. Definitely 5 out of 5. If you don't have any other Tony Bennett album, this is definitely a great start. Um, Live Carnegie Hall. So that's the interview for today. Have any questions? Just definitely feel free to comment, or if you have any comments, just in general, or what your feelings are about this album, definitely comment on it. All right, thank you. Have a nice day.